guys, and welcome to my at-home podcast studio. Today I'm giving you a little behind the scenes of how the Bossed Up podcast is made. If you aren't already a listener, you can find the Bossed Up podcast in iTunes and Spotify and wherever you get your podcasts. And moving forward, I'll be publishing the full-length interviews of all my expert guests on my YouTube channel right here. So you're tuning in today to hear the behind-the-scenes interview with Allison Alt, the Executive Director of Social Impact 360, which is this awesome organization I've been following and working with for a long time. I love everything they do, and especially this new class that they have offered to Bossed Up listeners at a discount rate that's specifically designed to bring more business practices to the nonprofit sector and to nonprofit professionals, because they're all about what we'll discuss on this interview today, basically the social impact sector. So doing well while doing good, which obviously something I strongly believe in. Now, I should be totally clear with you, we've set it up so that they've sponsored this interview as well. So I do get a commission at no cost to you when you sign up for that class, but I just want to make it clear that I would totally endorse this and fully love this course and everything that they're all about at Social Impact 360, and that's why we've come to this partnership agreement, because I really believe in what they do. So I'll be providing more long-form video interviews of all the podcast guests that I interview on the pod here on YouTube moving forward. Let me know if you like that. Let me know if you listen to longer interviews here, because if so, we can always do this for the guests that we have on the podcast. Now, as a slight heads up, this is our first time having done that. So there was a little bit of video lag on Allison's connection. So if you see a bit of choppiness throughout the course of the video interview, that is why. We're working on rectifying that moving forward, so it shouldn't be an issue. It's still an awesome interview to listen to on YouTube while you're doing whatever it is that you want to do. But if you're not a podcast listener, and all the interviews that I do on the Bossed Up podcast typically go longer, and then we cut them shorter to make it really concise for the podcast listening experience. So here on YouTube is the best place to listen to get all the details and just a little more behind the scenes insight into how it all gets made. But yeah, this is the podcast studio that Brad and I have been working to flesh out / jam room in our house, because we love playing music together. And yeah, let me know what you think, because it's been a labor of love that Brad has been making happen. You can check out his work, awesome fabricator, awesome_fabricator on Instagram too. Anyway, enjoy the interview. Allison and I talk all about how nonprofits can better pay their interns, better pay their staff, and why the social impact sector is so exciting to us and the future of doing well and doing good. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what you think. Hi, everybody. This is Emily Aries, the founder and CEO of Bossed Up, and welcome to the Bossed Up podcast. This is our long-form video interview edition, so I'm so excited to be joined today by Allison Alt, the Executive Director of Social Impact 360, which you may have heard on the podcast this month because they've sponsored a few episodes, because we're so excited about this new class that they're running, bringing business principles to the nonprofit sector. Allison is an attorney with over 8 years of experience in the professional services realm, and we're so excited to have you here today, Allison. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Emily. Excited to be here also.
So we've got a sticky question today, and it's one I'm really excited to break down, because there's so many different, very strong opinions when it comes to unpaid internships and really navigating the world of internships altogether. So let's start by addressing today's listener-submitted career conundrum, which is, if you work at a place that doesn't pay their interns or underpays and overworks their interns, how can we deal with navigating advocacy on not only on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of our fellow colleagues? Do you want to sort of give us your first take on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we, particularly in the nonprofit sector, we're always dealing with, certainly, is how do we pay people appropriately, particularly interns. And I know I used to work for an organization where we actually placed young people on internships. So this was a constant conversation about how do we pay them, what's appropriate for that time. And even thinking about my first job in DC, right? I came up here, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, wanted to work in public service, and got to my first internship, and they said, hey, it'd be great if you could do an internship for a year unpaid in DC. And I went, yeah, it would be great if I could do an unpaid internship in DC for a year. I said, but how will I eat? So I think this is a question certainly, as I said, we're all dealing with, and I have many thoughts on it.
Yeah, and we focused this month on the podcast on crafting a career with impact, really focusing on the nonprofit and for-purpose sector, the public sector included. And it seems to me that this is a common challenge. How do we make doing well and doing good work together? So give us a little bit of background on your take on this issue, and tell us more about how Social Impact 360 is working to make those two things possible.
Thanks. Yeah. I feel like this is one of my career purposes, is really to figure this experiment out, right? So at Social Impact 360, we actually are working towards exactly what you were saying, which is to make sure that people can both do well and do good. And so what we're doing across the country is we are actually training young people in how to build businesses that solve social issues. And also we are connecting our 1,000 alumni that are young CEOs, and these are innovators in top companies who, are moving up in the ranks, if you will, to really think about, how do we combine those things and placing them actually on social impact projects in the business sector, so that the future of business and social impact work is really changed, and that we can really live that do well and do good mantra. But I think it's extremely important. What the internship piece is a really interesting question, because I think, that really, there are a number of ways to advocate for it, right? If the organization has resources, certainly you can think about things like educational stipends, right? You can think about college credit. So there are, ways around that. I think you can certainly organize your colleagues in advocating as a group, that this is an important issue for your staff, and you'd like to see interns be paid appropriately. And as such, what can we do as an organization to either budget that ahead of time, or, as if we really feel strongly enough as a staff, right, to create some sort of pot of money towards that. So I think there's a lot you can do in advocacy, but it really starts with, do you have those resources available? I as a nonprofit executive, I think we that's the big issue for me, is making sure that the nonprofit sector, has the resources available to do the great work that they are doing.
I love that advice you have for our caller, which is don't go it alone on this.
No, don't go it
right?
alone.
Like, create consensus, create buy-in, and just using the word we is so helpful here, saying this is something that I want our values to reflect, that we value this kind of effort and energy and support.
Right.
And, how can we find a solution? I advise that when it comes to advocating for yourself, in terms of pay and benefits and negotiation situations, and definitely when it comes to advocating for other changes on your team, especially when it comes to allocating resources.
Certainly.
So what about nonprofits that just don't have the resources there?
Right. I think that's a real problem that we really need to have a conversation about in the nonprofit sector, which I'm definitely having that conversation now with a lot of folks. And that is that I think, we have a sort of a history of looking at nonprofit work and saying, that we talk about it. It's charity, right? It's volunteer. Right. But there are, a tremendous amount of individuals working in this sector who by no means is their work volunteer, right?
Right.
And we really need to do a lot of work to think about how we are perceiving nonprofit work and how we are talking about it to make sure that we are associating what we do with the value that we provide. I mean, we're providing extremely important services to people who need it. We had that conversation as a nonprofit staff so many times, which was, do we even charge groups to come and volunteer, right? Does that create a different perception of the value of the work that we are doing? And as I mentioned, in social impact work, I am constantly thinking about how do we change that perception.
Well, I love where the social impact sector is coming in to kind of form this hybrid. And for those who aren't familiar, can you explain just what does social impact work really mean? What is that sector all about?
Right. So social impact is really looking at how do we create a third entity, if you will, right? It's not nonprofit, it's not business, but it takes the best elements of both, right? It does phenomenal work, but it is it is sustainable financially. So, for instance, that's part of the reason why at Social Impact 360 we are training young people in how to build businesses that solve social issues. So, how do you create revenue streams, and how do you financially think about your model for nonprofit type work in a very sustainable way? And I really think that it's important for the survival of our sector and for moving us forward.
Yeah, of course, I'm very biased towards that kind of work because I remember wrestling with it myself when I started Bossed Up 5 years ago.
Right.
A lot of folks assumed I would start it as a nonprofit because it solves a social problem. It helps women in a world that's pretty biased against women to advocate for what they need to be sustainable. But how ironic would it have been had I started a business model that wasn't sustainable in and of itself? So I really committed myself early on to saying, I love nonprofits, but I'm starting a business. And I had to correct quite a few well-intentioned men who would describe my business as a nonprofit. And I said, no, we solve a social problem. We have a mission that's focused on doing good work and solving this problem. But we also have a sustainable financial model, which takes years to figure out, quite frankly. But I also encourage so many women, I think, are sort of pushed into that sector for helping others and doing good work and being charitable in our energies. And some of us resist econ like I did. I totally resisted econ classes. And had I realized that business can be a tool for good, that economics and economic models can also further social impact, I might have been more inclined to not run away from the business classes and in college. And I really encourage folks to push back on the stereotype that all business is profit first only, because it's not.
Right. And I think that is, particularly with the next generation, right, we're seeing tremendously is that they're saying, I don't understand why I need to make a choice, right? Why do I have to choose to go into the for-profit sector and feel like I can't do, meaningful and purposeful work? And why do I have to go into the nonprofit sector and feel like I can't be paid what I feel is appropriate? And so we're certainly thinking about, as a sector, how do we solve that? And it really is extremely important.
Now, when it comes to getting paid to do good work, right? Getting paid to do work that has a social cause behind it. I hear from a lot of women in terms of my negotiation conversations that negotiating while nonprofit is especially tricky, especially hard. And this conversation, this challenge that our listener has seems to fall in line with that. Do you have any advice? I mean, I actually just gave a mini episode to our listeners a couple weeks ago on negotiating while nonprofit, but I'd be curious to hear, for those of us who are in the nonprofit sector already and are feeling quite underpaid ourselves, what advice would you have for them for not just advocating for the interns, but advocating for themselves?
Sure. A lot of advice, actually. I think, really important to understand, what budget your nonprofit is working with, right? Before you go into that negotiation, in my opinion, because then you can position yourself appropriately. I've been in some really interesting conversations with, even managers in larger nonprofits. And, had I known, what that budget was working with, I could have come up with a range that I feel would be, appropriate, pushing the bounds enough, but not too much, right? To almost be insulting, if you will. But I think it's important to know that.
How do you figure that out? How do you
That's a
find
really
that
good question.
information?
Yeah, well, all nonprofits have to publish their 990s. So you actually can find out quite a bit of information about, what the financial situation of a nonprofit looks like. But I think also good to, of course, I'm sure you give this advice, but ask folks who work there.
Yeah.
Really get the inside scoop. Certainly.
Totally. Great. I want to look into those 990s though. So they have to have them published on their own websites. Is that correct? Like publicly available financial records?
Sure. So not necessarily on their own websites, but yes, 990s are public. I mean, that's filed with their taxes. So you definitely are able to see what, nonprofits are working with.
And that's almost a benefit compared to negotiating in other sectors. I recall, it's not easy to find, but if you can really track down the right federal websites. I recall when I was working for a political committee, we all looked up each other's salaries, and lo and behold, my fellow state directors in the Northeast were at this conference, and they all realized that I'm getting paid more than any of them. And I was the youngest state director at the time, and everyone got a little pissed off about that. I found it a little bit amusing myself, but the information is out there. It can be a benefit to you when going in to negotiate. If you do your due diligence, do your homework, find out where those federal reporting mechanisms are, because that information is out there.
Right. Yeah, no, it's really important. And certainly, folks who are already working there know quite a bit about, what that landscape looks like. So that can always be helpful too.
Definitely. I want to come back to the internship question for you for a moment, especially given your legal background. I thought you would find this interesting. Under federal law, there are 6 criteria that must be met in order for an unpaid internship to be legal. Have you heard of this before?
Right.
So as someone who has,
certainly.
as someone myself who has had unpaid interns at Bossed Up in the past, which I'd like to explain further in a moment, I find it interesting that when these 6 criteria are met, it's not illegal or, in my opinion, amoral to have interns that aren't getting paid in the traditional sense of the word. 1, the internship, even though it includes an actual operation of the facilities, is similar to training that would be given in an educational environment. Number 2, the experience is for the benefit of the intern. Number 3, the intern doesn't displace regular employees, but works closely under their supervision. Number 4, the employer providing the training derives no immediate advantage from the activities of the intern. And in some occasions, its operations may actually be impeded. Number 5, there's no guarantee of a job at the end of the internship. And number 6, both parties understand and knowingly proceed that this is an unpaid situation. I found those very interesting because I paid close attention to that when designing our internship programs. Have you seen unpaid internships work or be of benefit to folks when they're designed that way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, let's just be real, right? Not everyone is going to have the resources to pay interns, particularly in the nonprofit sector at this day and age, right? And I do think there are times when having interns who are not paid makes total sense. It is an educational benefit to the young person that you're working with, particularly if they're coming in for a short period of time, right? And they're gaining valuable skills and maybe going back to school. I think, for instance, we have some summer interns. They're also in an educational program that they're here. So they're interning with us. They're getting education, simultaneously. That's of real benefit to them. So I think there are times when it makes a lot of sense. At those longer term internships, I think, we really need to start thinking about on that, what is the young person, how are they being compensated if that work kind of evolves into more than an educational experience.
Yes, I agree completely. I, in fact, don't have any interns right now because I don't have the capacity to have a program that is designed for the intern's benefit first. And that's the thing. From an employer standpoint, having interns is a costly manner, right? Or is a is a costly measure when you're designing an unpaid internship program that really does focus on training first, which isn't super long term. I hate the idea of like a perma internship. That's crazy to me.
Right.
You know, you've got to have clear beginnings and
Right.
ends, and what kind of training are you going to benefit from? And that's how we've designed our internships here, because I haven't been in the position to really pay interns in the past. And if I do have the kind of budget, I'm just going to hire somebody, whether they're in college or not. You know, however their experience level, if they're the right candidate for what I'm looking for, I would rather hire someone than have an unpaid intern who in many ways can be a drag on operations, because if you're doing unpaid internships right, you're putting their training first. And that's something we were very intentional about at Bossed Up, but it's not easy. And I just want to make it clear that unpaid internships aren't great in how they're utilized, especially at Fortune 500 companies that have the budget. But in nonprofits, in political campaigns, in advocacy organizations that don't have the budget, it can actually be a beneficial educational experience for a lot of folks who are navigating a career change or looking to pad their resume before entering the workforce. So I hate the blanket shame that we throw on unpaid internships, because it matters. The devil's in the details on these things.
100% agree. We do, certainly with our summer interns, do a tremendous amount to, prepare them, right, to make sure that we know what their educational goals are ahead of time, to, really teach them some systems that they're going to use in the future. So I think it really does depend on, the situation and the details and the time frame. And as you said, the budget that the organization is looking at, is this organization really, using this appropriately? So all things that are really important to think about.
Right. Absolutely. So tell us more about how you're advocating on a grand scale, like some of the programs that you're currently working on to make sure that whether it's in the nonprofit sector, the business sector, or that in-between social impact sector, that we're making sure that doing well and doing good isn't this binary choice we have to make.
Yeah, I think what we are doing on a national scale is showing that it's possible and that it works. So our Social Impact 360's alumni have, we've been in operation since 2012. So we have 1,000 alumni who have actually created businesses that are financially sustainable. We have alumni working on mental health, working on transportation, working on energy. I even have an alum that's working on technology that will help the visually impaired be able to code and be able to get jobs as computer programmers. So this is all work that you might, it's amazing.
Nice.
Really tremendous stuff. So the idea that you can't create business structures or you can't create revenue streams for meaningful work is not true, because we have seen that it is, and we have watched young people create these over the last several years. And so now what we're doing on a much larger scale, which I am very excited about, is we are transforming, this large alumni core that we have into what I'm calling the first service core for business for good. And so it's an all-youth network who really cares about, as you said, doing well and doing good and really showing folks that that's possible. And what they're going to be doing is actually connecting employees and companies to our alumni so they can create service projects in the business sector. So they can actually help businesses move to become more socially responsible. So it's a tremendous effort on the part of the next generation to really rethink, how we're doing this work and, hopefully how we're paying folks in the future. But it's also a lot of talking about it, right? And really advocating for folks to think differently in the nonprofit sector about, how are you operating, right? What revenue streams do you have? Can you create them? Because the truth of the matter is, right now resources are hard to come by for this work, and we need to be really smart about how we work in the sector with the resources that we have.
I love that. I feel like anytime I get a little depressed or bummed out about the status quo or like the politics of the day, which is pretty regular. I mean, I would be numb if I didn't get horrified and enraged on occasion watching the news these days. I always look at the next generation that's coming up, right? The folks who are organizing and these students who are such prominent advocates and activists and how activism is so cool right now.
It's so cool.
And I just love the mainstreaming of activism in this particular way because
Right.
the youth, I can say that now because I'm 30, right? The youth are are giving me so much hope and leave me feeling positive about the future because initiatives like this are happening and pushing back on the, you can only have it this way or that way conversation and saying, actually, let's come up with a third alternative. Let's make it both work. I love that.
Yeah, I'm in constant amazement of the things that young people are doing, and they're bootstrapping the resources to do it. So it's a really remarkable thing to watch, and you see the outcomes too. So it's not a experiment that hasn't produced a reality that we know that it works, and it's really moving folks towards that, right? It's saying, okay, nonprofit sector, look at what we're able to do. We can transform. For-profit sector, we can do this, and really bringing people on to join that, movement, if you will, to move towards that, and make sure that we're not staying complacent.
So for folks listening who are thinking, okay, sign me up, right? I'm ready for a career in social impact.
Right.
I'm lacking that sense of purpose, driven work in my corporate day job. Or even the folks who are saying, I've got all the purpose-driven work I can handle, but no paycheck,
Right.
How would you acknowledge or advise those folks when it comes to getting into this sector and really finding employment through it?
I hear that a lot. We have a lot of folks coming to us asking how do they get in the social impact sector. A lot of that today is happening, frankly, either in social impact, focused nonprofit work or through more corporate social responsibility work. Right now, small sector, right? Hard to get into, lots of years of experience moving up and working in, hybrid organizations that are working on for-profit and nonprofit work. But I think what, at least our organization is trying to offer folks is, we offer the professionals class so that we can help train nonprofit professionals and how to really transform and think about their organizations and revenue streams to help them move towards that model. So there is, hope for that. And to do that, we also, as I mentioned, are building the service core. And I think what's so important about that is that we will be connecting to actual employees and companies and saying, listen, we can incorporate this into your current work. This doesn't have to be an and or if, type of situation, and let us help you by bringing in the capacity and the knowledge to do that. And I'm so excited about working with employees and companies who are excited about that because I know I hear from them on a daily basis that that's what they want.
It's interesting, right? Because there's a dual need for more entrepreneurship in the social impact space to meet the demands of people who would work for those companies and, and more awareness of social impact revenue models or hybrid models in the corporate sector. Because you're right, like the demand from an employee perspective is so there. It probably makes getting into this field very competitive.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We must get, 10 calls a week, from folks who are in the sector who come back and say, we love and miss, being involved in social impact work and really want to do it, but, don't know how. Do I need to leave the sector in order to do that? Do I go back into nonprofit work? I think there's so many people who, would really benefit from that. And so, on our part, we're trying to make opportunities for this to happen.
I love it. And so what I really love most here is, as a final takeaway for this month's focus on crafting a cause-oriented career or an impact and purpose-driven career, is that there's a lot of ways to do that. And it's not either sell your soul to the corporate, evil corporations or, martyr yourself and your financial stability to be of service to others in the nonprofit sector. There are many shades of gray in between. And the social impact space is certainly a burgeoning part of that hybrid that combines the both of them. So for folks out there to check out Social Impact 360, obviously they've sponsored quite a few podcasts for us this month, which we're very grateful for. And you can check out their course that we're talking about on those ads that provides business acumen for the nonprofit sector. To learn more, they can go to where? socialimpact360.org/class, I believe.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to check out the
Awesome.
class, and we train groups. We're also going to have online content soon. Really thinking about what the nonprofit sector needs, and also doing it, as we've been talking about, in an affordable way for them to take advantage of.
Yeah. So we can pay more interns. Yes.
I would love that. I love my interns. I would love to be able to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, Allison. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.